Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Welcome to the Movers Mindset Podcast, where I talk with movement enthusiasts to learn who they are, what they do, and why they do it. My guest today is Vincent Thibault. Welcome, Vincent. How are you?
Hi, I'm very good actually. How about you?
I'm I'm off the charts. Awesome. I've only waited seven, eight. I've only waited 8 years to talk to you. No. Um, a little anecdote. I believe I first met you actually in person at an American Rendezvous event in Boston in, I'm going to say 2014, 2013, maybe. You probably know the year because you'd probably remember being there because you gave they did like these little fun, like not even lectures. It was like, anybody who wants to hear this weird person jibba jabba for 5 minutes, go sit over here, kind of breakout sessions. So I was like, oh, no, someone over. I think somebody told me you should go listen to Vincent. So I had a chance to sit and listen to you. This is going to turn into a question. I had a chance to, and I'm not going to ask you what you said. That would be really rough. And you were talking about training, and I'm going to say you were talking about motivation. And the takeaway that I got from it was um, like, just do whatever it takes. And the takeaway for me was like, well, if I'm dying of thirst, or I need a snack, or I need to find a simpler way to begin, or I need to find, it was just like, whatever it takes. It doesn't have to be, Craig's movement doesn't have to be, you didn't know who I was. You weren't talking to me in particular, but Craig's movement doesn't have to be anything specific. Just find some way to begin. And through the years, sometimes people ask, sometimes I talk about, I developed this thing I call the shim, or the wedge, which is where I get stuck. And I think I got this from you. I get stuck and I go, there's nothing here that I can do. I'm crossing my arms and pouting. And then I think of Vincent and I think, well, I don't know, what would be the simplest thing I could possibly do here, no matter how dumb it is. And I just do that. And then variably moving gives me another idea, and then on I go. So I don't know if I got that from you, but I'm going to say I got it from you. Hey, thanks for that. Um, what comes to mind for you when you think about moving and moving with other people? So it's one thing to train on our own, to go out and move and get what we need out of movement. Well, what comes to mind for you when you think about moving with other people?
There's always an element of rejoicing for me. That's where I'm at these days. I've been reconnecting with some old friends, old training partners, and frankly, it doesn't quite matter what type of moves we do, or how much of a physical challenge we get out of it, or how much of a workout we get out of it, or whatever. It's really about rejoicing. We're so happy to be together and share some good times. Um, but I think one of the key words that come to mind for me is communication. Communication. There has to be some kind of exchange between the people you're training with and yourself and your environment, right? If you want to isolate any of those elements, it doesn't work at all. The situation gets frozen, you're not inspired, and it doesn't go anywhere, right?
Mm.
So there's always an element of communication, even if you're by yourself. By the way, there has to be some kind of communication between your body and mind, between you and the environment, and so on and so forth. So it's always there.
Mm. So I'm torn. So as soon as we say communication, one of the things that I love most about training is that when you train with other people, there's multiple layers to the communication.
Yeah.
And like, I can't do what you do, right? And actually, you probably can't do what I do because like, it's just not going to work. And I think seeing somebody else move, even though you're like, I can't do that, you somehow have a movement vocabulary. Each of us have our own vocabulary. And it helps us to understand what that other person is actually feeling, not just what they're thinking, but what they're feeling when you see them move. So you mentioned joyous. I think you mentioned joyous. And that you can see that in someone's movement, or you can see that they're tired, which is what most people see when they see Craig move, or you can see exhaustion, or you can see all these different things. And I've loved that. And some of the Oh, I got so many memories, but some of my favorite training sessions have been when there's also a language barrier. So just some spectacular, I go somewhere and they did this a lot. Quebec, they would say like, "Do you want us to teach like it's a whole class full of people who speak French, or the Quebec version of French." And they're like, "Do you want us to teach in English?" And I'd be like, "No, like then why? Then everybody else struggles. So just teach in French." And then it would be just like, "Wow, I'm completely lost. I have no idea what's going on. I thought I spoke this language." Um, but those opportunities to communicate with movement, or somebody saying words at me, like language, like specific vocabulary in a different
Well,
language, that it like unlocks
different
something.
language, right? It's a
Yeah.
whole language. I mean, even the way we study Art du Déplacement, or however you want to call it, by the way, to me, there's a process that is akin to learning languages. You know,
Mm.
first, you can learn a little bit of grammar, some do's and don'ts, but it's very basic. I mean, it's not about a whole lot of absolute don'ts, like this you can never do in Art du Déplacement. There are
Yeah.
actually very few things that are absolute don'ts. Very few, but
Yeah.
they're there for your own security, right? And
Yeah.
that
They're all that kind of stuff. Shins.
well, that's one thing. There's always a matter of respecting the environment and so on. But once you learn these basic rules, then eventually you can learn some more vocabulary. And everybody, as you said, has a different vocabulary. Of course, there are some words that everybody uses, mostly.
Mm.
But then afterwards, there's a different level where you can learn to express yourself in different ways, work on your style, so to speak, as if you were writing or something.
Mm.
And everybody can find their own voice at some point. But this does not come right off the bat. There's different levels to learning a language, and it's the same thing with Art du Déplacement. But all I'm saying is that it is a language.
Yeah.
There's definitely something that you get from others when you look at what they're doing, or something that you are also sharing when you're training by yourself or with others.
Um, let's go further down the language rabbit hole. I'm Sometimes I get fascinated by the idea that the language that you think in, so I'm a primarily English speaker. So I think in English. I like, the direct objects go after the verbs and, certain adjectives first and some sound like I think in that language, and it changes the types of ideas, or it constrains the types of ideas that one can have. This is the theory as I know it. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on, so if movement is its own language, what are the types of ideas that maybe it suppresses that we would normally have, like as a regular person who, like a regular everyday Joe? What are the types of ideas that they might hold on to that once they start to think in movement, they might no longer have those ideas?
Hmm.
That's a really hard question, I
Yeah,
know.
it's a tough one. I don't know if that's going to answer it, but one thing that comes to mind is our relationship with time changes across different languages. For example, in some Arabic and some Eastern languages and so on, the way the phrases are structured, they look at the action as if they were looking, towards the past. Some languages look at the action as if it's going to happen next, and so on. So the relationship with time is a little bit different in the very mechanics of the language. This sounds like a very highfalutin notion, but
I started it. I'm sorry.
yeah. But this kind of notion, I believe, kind of dissolves. It kind of disappears with movement, because there's only one time when you move, and it's the
Mm,
moment.
that immediacy.
Of course, you can do some planning. You can see some obstacles that are coming. At some point, oh well, I'm gonna have to run. If I want to make that running jump, for example, you can just walk there and do. So
I'm gonna hope my way over.
you have to have some kind of vision at some point. You have to be able to foresee what is coming. But the movement itself is very much grounded in the present moment. And it might sound corny, but that's actually a very important part of training. and evolving as a practitioner too. So I think this is one of the things that comes to my mind, and it might not answer your question, but the relationship with time is very different in the language of movement, so to speak.
Hmm.
And that also, by the way, has implications for our relationship with ourselves. For example, if I'm expressing myself in French or English, or it doesn't matter if I'm actually talking with somebody or if I'm within my own mind, if that makes any sense, like
Yeah.
self-talk. Uh, I'm always going to be projecting, right? Oh, I'd like to be this person or that person, or maybe I'd like to present myself in this or that way, or maybe I should not have done this in the past. I should have told this guy
I
this.
should have seen. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, but when you starting to leap into the movement language, then that also tends to disappear, or it gets assuaged somehow. It lessens the self-talk that's constantly
Mm.
going on, because there's no other way. You know, if you're doing a palm spin on a rail, for example, that's just a very graphic example. But if you're doing a palm spin on a rail and you're not fully present, you're going to see the result right away. I can tell you.
I, I, that's a great answer. As
That
you
was
were,
a crazy question, my friend.
yeah, well, so part of this job on this side is to figure out what people, like, are we soft pitching today, or are we throwing strikes, or am I throwing at your head, or what's going on? I am fascinated recently, like in the last year or two, I've been trying to write more, and I'm writing short form stuff. And that really forces me. So, as you were talking about that, I was thinking writing forces me to filter and forces me to, I don't want to say censor, I want to say like quiets my internal blah, 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 crazy Craig person. And movement does that too. And they kind of do it in different ways, and the result is different. I think moving tends to if I move enough, the thinking kind of really stops. Not in a I'm brain dead way, but like in I really get into the present moment. It actually turns into like Zen. Movement is like to me a form of Zen practice. Where was I going with this? Oh, I know. Hey, let's talk about writing. So, in in 2015, I looked this up. I cheated. In 2015, in September, I went to an ADD event in Quebec. It was awesome. People, if you get a chance, if they have the event, go. Weather was gorgeous. I hung out with some people who were from America, who were from all over from Canada. It was great. I got nothing but nice things to say. But while I was there, the ebook version of your book, I've talked about it for years. I'm afraid to say Art du Déplacement, Lessons in Practical Wisdom. I think it's called in English. What's the
I
title in
believe
French?
so. I think so.
Now we're both like, duh, how can we
I
not
should
know?
know. Yeah, yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. And I read the French. I am not reading the French. Lessons in Practical Wisdom. What is the title in French?
Leçon de
Sagesse.
sagesse pratique.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Leçon de sagesse pratique.
There we go.
Yeah, practical.
Years ago, I apologize. It's a bit of a haze.
Language nerds. So anyway, this book came out a little before that, but I got the Kindle version, and it's not to people who are going, oh God, he's talking about reading. I hate reading. Stop. It's not that long. It's 90, possibly 89, but I think it's 90. 90. Yeah, it's 90. I love it. Bite-sized, short. What I was doing with it was I would read one of them, and then I basically read it and then go train, like with the group that I was training with, not up in Quebec, but like I'd read a chapter and then train and then think about it and then write about it. I really love the book. If anybody unless you've been under a rock or you've never heard me before, you know that I love the book because I talk about it all the time. And what I really liked about it was it's written in both English and French, so you don't have to wait or hope that the translator did a good job because it was written by the same person. So the author, both things would come through as well as possible. But what I wanted to ask today was, I know that you more recently put, I don't know if I want to say a second edition or a slightly updated version, but you didn't do the English. You only did the French. And really what I was thinking was, what made you go back to the project. So it was first done in, say, 2015, or you're writing it in like probably 2014. And then you went back, I don't know, how many years later was it?
Uh,
Six?
6 years or something. Yeah,
Like,
at least 5. Yeah.
what made you go back to it? And because I know writers often talk about like, it's really hard, you got to ship it and then it's done. What made you go back and change? And what was the catalyst for that?
Oh, well, thank you for that. And I know you really enjoyed the first version, and I know how much you talked about it to your friends and so on. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Um, I believe that there was, room for improvement over the years, and even if it was just over the span of 5-6 years or whatever that was, uh, even if it's fairly short, right, 5 or 6 years,
Mhm.
um, still my philosophy evolved. The way I'm training evolved. My lifestyle had to change, due to age and circumstances. Everything changes. Uh,
Right.
so I had to adapt, obviously. But the thing is, I've realized, with hindsight, you say hindsight, right?
Yes.
Uh, that first of all, there was there was room for improvement when it comes to the writing per se. Like the style. I think
Mm.
I could do better, frankly, in both languages, by the way. Um, so I did my best with the rewritten, like a new version in French. I've actually rewrote the whole thing, so to speak. It's mostly the same content, but I also wanted to add some nuances, and there were some elements that I believe some people might have misunderstood. Not that anybody told me, like it's not like I received emails with people, filled with
Right.
confusions and.
Yeah.
But frankly, I'm just going to give you an example. It's actually a very personal example, but it's not that personal. I'm mentioning it in the new introduction, the introduction to the new edition. Um, in this book, I draw upon so many different sources of inspiration, from Greek philosophy to modern psychology to Taoism and martial arts, and a bunch of other
Yeah.
places.
Pop culture, right?
But there's some pop culture references as well. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. But uh, this might be somewhat confusing for the people who really know me and who happen to know that I'm actually a very devout Buddhist practitioner. This is my spiritual refuge, and I wanted to point out that there's actually a difference between having a spiritual refuge, so to speak, like one's life path and so on, and drawing inspiration. And uh, one does not contradict the other, but it might be confusing if you don't know that. So the the analogy that I like to give, is I did not come up with this analogy, by the way, but anyway, is if you're trying to find water in the ground, right? You might be given a shovel, and start to dig. But if you dig a little bit, just a tiny bit of soil, and then you move a few meters away and a tiny bit, and then you move, and your whole life you could be digging small holes
Hmm.
without ever getting to the water. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
There's more or less something like that with spirituality. At some point, if you just do constant shopping, uh, you know, it doesn't gonna get you anywhere. That's what I'm thinking. But you can still be very open and appreciative of different, lineages of wisdom, so to speak, or different ideas, and have friends from all different traditions. That totally works. There's no problem with that. So the reason I'm mentioning that uh, is that I just wanted to make the distinction, and not only from a personal point of view, but also to explain what Art du Déplacement is and is not. And Art du Déplacement is not promising enlightenment. It's not telling you, well, if you do this, if you follow Art du Déplacement, you're going to get. No, it's a training method, and of course, it does have some philosophical components, some psychological components, social elements, and spiritual elements to some extent. But it's a training method, and people sometimes they get really stiff, you know, due to the fact that you're supposed to use the values of Art du Déplacement into your whole life, which is totally true. You know, it has to make sense at some point outside of the training sessions. But it doesn't matter. That it doesn't mean that Art du Déplacement is the end all. You know, philosophically speaking, you know, that's
Right.
just one way to get in touch with yourself, with with others. One way to be at ease with your environment. One way to keep in shape too, and to stay creative. It's not necessarily the end all. You know, there's other stuff in life.
Mm.
So I just wanted to remind readers that it's not because we talk about spirituality in the context of an Art du Déplacement book that it's meant to be, a Bible of sorts. It's not at all. It's just a suggestion box, if you will, like an idea box, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I think it makes sense. I have to resist the urge to like copy and paste out a PDF and drop it all into Google Translate. But I think that I actually used the book like that in a way. For a while I was doing, like I would spend 1 week, reading the particular piece that I was bookmarked on, and then training, and then writing blog posts about it, doing it as like a personal book study kind of thing. And I think that's a good way. Whatever people listening, whatever would attract you, you can pick any book. A lot of Western religions do this with daily readers. Like there's the official particular one of these from your particular religion, whatever they call that. Anyway, your specific church might say, here's the thing that we're using. And then it has this advantage of, going back to language again, it has this advantage of, one of the chapters in your book is like about lemons. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Uh, and that's a common metaphor. Is that a metaphor or a simile? I'm not the greatest at
Or
grammar.
saying, or whatever.
But it's when you hear that, everybody has an idea in their head, and we all have kind of like a similar idea. And then having these common touch points in language are helpful. So it's useful to have writing, to say, like, here, I made this. This is what I think is the best that I can present. And then it's a thing that you can share. I mean, maybe not a dead tree version, like, can be digital, but it's a thing that you share with other people. And then they use it as a jumping off point for their thinking. And it gives you this, as a writer, just anybody who writes, not like a capital W writer or author, printed books, but as anybody who writes, writing and then sharing that gives you the opportunity for other people to see it, and then for them to come back later and say, I thought about what you wrote. You're completely wrong, or you're completely right, or it gave me this idea. It's a lot of that feedback, or that, to me, I always think of it like a Mobius strip. It comes back, but it's different. That feedback is part of why I love doing these conversations. Although a lot of times it's a monologue because I talk too much.
Well,
Okay, so what's coming to mind for you? Do you want to keep talking more about the book? Do you want to talk more about language? What's coming to mind?
there's actually another nuance that I wanted to discuss between the two different versions of the book. It's actually pretty much the same. So if you guys, anybody who hears that, oh no, I can't read French, the first version totally works. I mean, it's not as elegant as I would like it to be, and maybe someday I'll do a new version. But it's
Maybe your bar is just too high for
95%.
translation to English.
Right. About 95% of the content is the same, so no worries. But I was going to discuss the one of the things that, with hindsight, I realized that was a little off or easily misunderstood. And why? Because we, and when I say we, is me and my training partners. This is something that we actually misunderstood for quite some time, I believe, as coaches as well. Is when we talk about the culture of effort. This is something that we talk about all the time, right? Effort. It's all about effort. Art du déplacement, la culture de l'effort, and whatnot. And there's this whole idea, this whole notion that if you transform, or if you manage to change your very relationship with effort and see it as something worthwhile in and of itself, then it's much more gratifying, whatever, regardless of the result. So what I'm saying is that as you start your Art du Déplacement journey, for example, you start to train, you do some QM, some quadrupedal movements, and so on. You find it excruciating. You might hate it at first, you don't see the point, but at some point, you might start to relax as you do it. And it's the doing that is, more fulfilling and, more worthwhile. And you actually enjoy the process instead of just the result. That makes sense, right? This is
Yes.
something that we get to see after a few years of training, I guess. But for many years, we insisted so much on effort. And I think that we did not see that there was a bit of a overemphasis. We're emphasis. I'm looking
You had
for
it. Overemphasis is just fun.
overemphasis. That's the right word.
Yes.
Too much, of a focus on that was counterproductive. And by that I mean that there are some areas in your training and in your life as well, obviously, where effortlessness is precisely what's required. Or some kind of middle way, between the two extremes, of sheer laziness and, like martial marine
Sloth.
but there's also the extreme if we had this marine kind of mentality at some point, like very like it was very, very intense, and that may not be always sustainable. It works to some extent, and at some, and there are some moments in your life where you have to do that. You have to kick yourself in the butt, so to speak, and really, get to it.
Push. Yeah.
And it's actually very healthy to do that sometimes. But if you only do that, it's not sustainable. And, people who have been training for a while, then they get to, I don't know, 40, 45, 50, and they get to realize that their relationship with their body changes and with their training change, and they have to adapt. It's not sustainable a model if you just push all the time. So one perfect example of this middle way between, sheer laziness and too much effort, which, by the way, could easily be misconstrued as stiff intentionality. That's the whole issue right there, is confusing effort with a stiff intentionality. That's how I phrase it. I don't know if it makes any sense.
That makes perfect sense. That's a good.
But
Say that again.
The issue is confusing effort and stiff intentionality. That's how I would phrase it. But
I like that.
might not be the ideal way to phrase it. But a perfect example, I believe, of this middle way between the two extremes would be as you walk on a rail. If you're too stiff, it's not gonna work. We all know that. If we're too stiff, somehow lacking confidence and believe that every single muscle of our body has to be tense for us to be able to stick on the rail, it's not going to work. And if you're going the opposite direction and are way too relaxed and don't put your mind to it at all, it also doesn't work. So you have to find some kind of balance. And strangely, funnily enough, we're talking about a balanced drill. It's actually the quintessential example of finding this middle way, so to speak. So I was just saying that because a lot of people have been coaching to youth, for example, and not just teenagers and children and so on, but to people of all age groups, and they've been pushing so much. But then, there are injuries that happen and stuff happen, and people don't age that well sometimes if they're pushing too much. So you have to avoid laziness at all costs. And that's definitely something you want to avoid. You want to get a good workout and so on. It has to be challenging, but there also has to be some kind of I don't want to say softness, but it has to be smooth somehow. Your training has to have some component of ease and relaxation.
Brilliant. There's a word that I sometimes use for that. At the end there, you were searching for that. Oh, that I don't want to say it, but je ne sais quoi, And I think it's sometimes I use the word touch, which I got from Adam McClellan. I think is the first person I heard talk about touch in parkour. And there's an idea, or the idea of touch is this thing where it's like, well, how do you land? Well, you land with the right touch. How do you do a cat pass? Like, there's this ethereal thing where if you do it right, all of the meanings of the word touch are there. And then if you do it wrong, some piece of touch is missing. And I found that was it's still something that I need to work on forever. But I found that for me, that was a big deal in the beginning. I used to refer to it, I still do, as bashing. I can bash. I'm just like, I just put my head down, often quite literally, and just go. And there's no mindfulness about it at all. There's no touch. It's not that I hurt people, but it's like QM. Okay, I can just you want to bash 2 kilometers. Okay, like it hurts, but I can do that. And I think your description about that stiff intentionality is like, because intentionality sounds like a great thing, generally is, but
Yeah,
if it's stiff, if like all you have is that, I think that's a great way to describe it. And I feel like if I was stiffly intentional, I would be missing touch. Maybe not all the time, but I'd be missing a certain touch.
makes sense. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Quick random story, doesn't involve you. You weren't there. I had the distinct pleasure of training in Every, and they do this thing. I think Jan led it. They do this thing at night where everybody's training together in the dark. I mean, there's street lights and stuff, and we were doing variations of QM. Imagine that. But before we started, we were asked to pick a partner, and we were asked to find somebody that anybody. I mean, maybe you know them, maybe you don't. Doesn't matter. Just pick someone who's going to be your partner for this whole session. And it doesn't matter where they are the same physical capability as you, because you're not going to train together. You're just going to check in on each other. And I mean, it wasn't a new thing. I'm sure they've done that a million times. But to me, that was brilliant because, and I won't tell all the anecdotes about the training itself, but the training was pretty brutal. But at the end of each section, Vincent's juggling, never saw that show. At the end of each section of it, I was pretty much bashing. But in order to find my partner in the sea of people who were all doing the activity, I had to literally look up. I had to figuratively lift my spirit and look around for my partner and then go to them and be like, how are you? And then when they said, how am I? It was kind of like, instead of lying, be like, I'm great. I'm gonna keep pushing through. Like if you had asked me at the end of the bashing, I would have told you I was doing great. But by the time I got a chance to go talk to that person, that was a more in the moment, more realistic um, response or engagement that I was able to have with that person. So I thought that was just something that came to mind about a way of training. I don't know whether those guys were doing that because it's a way to teach people to be in the moment, to be mindful, to not, I don't know. I'm not asking it. I'm just like, it struck me that, that kind of did that by making me switch context between the literal get down in it and then get up and check on your partner and then get back down in it, check on your partner, get back down in it. That's just something that popped into mind, and I didn't want to really say it because it ate up 3 minutes of time, but that's a thing.
Yeah, it's a good story. It's a good story. And what you said, by the way, you mentioned at some point lifting your spirit, or something like that. And you used the word figuratively, but it's not so figurative. There's something very real about it. Like
Yeah.
at some point you have to, like change your posture mentally, physically too, you know? And, so it's not just figurative. There's an actual lifting of your energy level, and there's a change of posture, both physically and mentally. And it's,
You're right. Of course. I definitely agree. I was just thinking that, where the mind goes, the body follows, where the body goes, the mind follows, right? These two things are symbiotic. So the act of standing up and getting a little thoracic extension, and then the brain like wakes up, and yeah,
there
there's a
you
lot
go.
of that. I'm watching our time tick away. Fortunately, this doesn't have to be the only time we ever do one of these. We'll schedule one for 8 years from now.
There we go.
The calendar doesn't go that far. I will just say, and of course, the final question: 3 words to describe your practice.
Oh dear, that's a pretty good one. I would like to say ease, connection, and adaptation. And I might unpack this a tiny bit. Do we have time for that? Just
All the time in the world.
well, I thought about ease. because of course, we're when we train in Art du Déplacement or parkour or, whatever type of discipline or movement you do, at some point, you want to be at ease with the motions, the very movements. You come to master them, so to speak, or, at least, understand the language,
Mm.
as you said. But I think you can learn to be at ease with yourself and at ease with your environment, at ease with your training partners, with whom, or who? Anyway, with whom you don't have to. I apologize if that's not the right one.
I don't know.
uh, you don't have to play games with them. That's the whole point. You can be yourself. You don't have to pretend that you know stuff if you don't know it, and if you do, you don't have to pretend that you're, a loser, or pretend to fake
Right.
honesty or anything. There's some stuff some stuff you don't. You don't have to pretend that you're in top shape if you're not in top shape that very day. You just do what you can. You can be yourself. And the whole notion of ease is actually very profound. Uh, and that's where my personal training connects with meditation, by the way, is that one of the first things we learn through Buddhist meditation is to befriend with yourself. I don't want to confuse the whole discussion and mix our metaphors here, but there's this notion of learning to befriend with your own mind. And that can translate into the way you approach movement and any kind of training, by the way. So at ease can be understood at several levels. And then connection. Well, of course, it's the same thing. There has to be some kind of connection with the environment. You mentioned the word touch, which has, again, many different levels, including a very gross level. Gross in the sense of, physical, like the actual textures.
Right.
You're getting so much information through textures and the sense of touch, and we barely talk about this nowadays because everything is so visual these days. But you're getting a lot of information through touch. But connection means being connected to your energy level, to your own capacities. Is your mind clear or not today? If it isn't,
Mm.
the right time to just start trying to do whatever stuff that might be risky for you. Maybe it's not. There might be some other stuff you could be doing that day, and so on. Connection also means being connected to your training partners and to everybody else in the neighborhood, because could be some people watching, and wondering, and so on and so forth. Connection also means, by the way, it could mean a lot of things, but it also means that you could be connected to the people who have been practicing this before you. Whether you've learned from the Yamakasi or somebody else, you can acknowledge that, you can appreciate what you've received from them. And there's also a connection with the people who will come after you, because sorry to deliver the news, but you won't be there forever, and you won't be coaching forever if you're a coach, and you won't be moving in the same way forever, and you don't know when you're going to see other people again. You're telling me as a joke, oh well, let's do this again in 8 years. Who knows, right? So there has to be some kind of authentic connection with others as well, as much as you can, and acknowledging the contribution of those that came before you. And adaptation. Well, I think most people who listen to your podcast will know that term. You got to adapt, right? So I don't want to. There's not much to add about this, but I think ease, connection, and adaptation are important words to me. And the third one, by the way, is important for me at this point in my life. I'm not sick or anything. I'm not that old either, but I know this. There's this thing with time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've heard about time.
Yes, I have noticed.
So so at some point you have to adapt to your own circumstances. If you always fight against your own circumstances, then it's not going to lead you anywhere. And those circumstances could be your schedule, your work situation, your life situation, your situation with your partner, your aches in your body, an old injury that pops up, whatever the case may be. You have to be to adapt and work with the material that's there, not just some idea of what could be there. You have to start where you are and go from there.
Terrific. That was awesome. Thank you
Always
for,
great.
those are three good
Yeah.
words, by the way, but thank you for taking the time. I appreciate you appreciate you not personally unfriending me as I've been pestering you for years. So I appreciate that. Thanks for taking the time today to chat. I hope people find the time to look up your book, either version, and I hope they get a chance to think more about what we're talking about. I think there's some really good ideas in there. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate. And if anyone needs to reach me, you can look me up online. I'll be happy to do whatever I can. Sometimes I'm a bit slow with the emails, but I'm always happy to hear from readers. So thank you.